Hi, it's Katrina. Chamunda. Chamunda is a fearsome personification of the Hindu divine mother Parvati. She is actually quite terrifying, shown with a skeletal body that looks like she is starving or emaciated, an angry or ferocious face, and veins popping out of her legs. Chamunda is often shown wearing a garland of severed heads or skulls and having either 4, 8, or 12 arms. She uses them for holding a drum, a trident, a sword, a snake, a thunderbolt, a severed head, a wine cup, and a few other things. She's described as having flaming eye sockets that burn the world and is surrounded by various beasts, as well as ghosts and skeletons. Her huge headdress is made of matted hair and is tied with snakes and a tiara of skulls. As the Metropolitan Museum of Art says, the goddess is always depicted in stark and horrific sculptures all throughout India. She is also one of the 7 matrikas, or mother goddesses, and one of the chief yoginis, which are a group of tantric goddesses who attend to the warrior goddess Durga. She is famous for decapitating the demons Chanda and Munda, and is known for being the destroyer of evil, although she looks quite evil herself. Chamunda is traditionally worshipped with offerings of wine and through ritual animal sacrifices, although the latter has become less popular in modern times. The goddess originated among tribes in central India who used to sacrifice not only animals, but humans as well. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore. She also drinks the blood of her defeated enemies and has snakes and skulls all around her decaying flesh. Images of the goddess appear on ancient temples dating back thousands of years. Burke and Hare murder dolls. Edinburgh, Scotland was a leading center of anatomical study during the 19th century, but this led to a shortage of cadavers for students to learn from, and 2 men named William Burke and William Hare saw an opportunity to profit from the skyrocketing demand for bodies. In 1828, the pair sold 17 corpses to an anatomist named Robert Knox, who dissected bodies during his lectures. Their first sale was the body of a lodging tenant who had died from edema, a condition that causes the body to swell. After realizing how much money they could make per body, Burke and Hare murdered 16 people and split the profits. They eventually got caught. Hare received immunity in exchange for his testimony and managed to avoid jail time. Burke, on the other hand, was hanged for his crimes the following year. But the twisted tale didn't end there. In 1836, a group of boys playing in a park found a strange collection of 17 dolls. They were packed into miniature coffins and stuffed into a hole on a hillside. People initially assumed that the dolls were toys, or that they had something to do with witchcraft, but many saw similarities between the dolls and Burke and Hare's victims, and suspected that there was a connection. Modern scientists performed DNA tests to see if they could prove that the killers created the dolls, but the results were inconclusive. Still, many researchers believe that the dolls have something to do with the murders. One theory suggests that Burke made the dolls to ease his guilty conscience. 8 of the dolls survive today and are on display at the National Museum of Scotland, where they serve as a curious mystery of the past. Demonic ancient jar. Last year, archaeologists were excavating a Neolithic farmhouse in Poland when they found a 7,000-year-old jar fragment that was shaped like a human face with horns. The team doesn't know the meaning of the figure depicted on the jar, but they believe that it may have had spiritual or religious significance to the people who created it. Similar objects have been discovered further to the south, but this is the first artifact of its kind ever found in Poland, leading experts to believe that the prehistoric villagers had contact with people who lived in what is now Hungary and Slovakia. The jar is made from obsidian, which was not locally sourced, further indicating that it was imported. The people who lived at the site were from the linear pottery culture. They lived in Europe from 5500 to 4500 BC and are known for the distinctive way they decorated their pottery. The settlement contains several longhouses, with each measuring around 36 feet long, as well as pits filled with broken ceramics and flint objects. Excavations are being carried out after the site was narrowly spared from destruction ahead of construction plans. Researchers scrambled to secure funding to complete the dig and are just now learning about what life was like for the linear pottery people who lived in the region. Whether the ongoing project will uncover the meaning behind the demonic-looking jar remains to be seen. A saint's heart. In 2012, a sneaky thief entered the Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin, Ireland, and made off with the 800-year-old heart of St. Lawrence O'Toole, the city's patron saint. Investigators believe that the intruder may have stayed in the church overnight before snatching the relic and taking the time to light 2 candles at the altar before leaving. St. Lawrence was born in County Kildare in 1132. He was appointed as the Archbishop of Dublin in 1161. While he did many noteworthy things during his time there, he became most famous for acting as a peacekeeper during the Anglo-Norman invasions of Ireland. The pious priest passed away in 1180 during a peacekeeping mission in Normandy, France. He was declared a saint in 1225. St. Lawrence's heart was kept on display at the cathedral inside a wooden heart-shaped box inside an iron cage. The thief who stole it in 2012 is thought to have used wire cutters to pry the cage open and get to the heart. As an object that was priceless to the church but had little monetary value, the relic was a strange choice for such a carefully plotted heist. To make things even weirder, 6 years after O'Toole's heart vanished, Irish police found it undamaged in Dublin's Phoenix Park. An intelligence investigation determined that the thief may have returned it because they thought it was cursed. A new and perhaps more secure enclosure was built for the heart, which went back on public display in November of 2018. Why do you think the thief stole the heart of St. Lawrence O'Toole? What do you think prompted them to abandon it in a park? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos coming up. Coffin birth and brain surgery. Around 1300 years ago, during the 7th or 8th century, a pregnant woman died in the town of Imola, Italy, weeks before she was due to give birth. In 2010, archaeologists found her buried with a hole in her skull and a collection of small bones beneath her pelvis. In what's known as a coffin birth, decomposition gases expelled the woman's fetus from her womb after she died. Archaeological discoveries of this phenomenon are extremely rare. A 2018 study determined that the hole in her skull was likely caused by a primitive brain surgery technique called trepanation, which involved drilling a hole into a person's skull to relieve pressure. It was used for treating numerous ailments, but apparently did little to help the pregnant woman. The researchers who conducted this study wrote that they think she experienced either preeclampsia or eclampsia, which are potentially deadly pregnancy-related high blood pressure conditions. Doctors may have performed a trepanation in a last-ditch effort to save her life. Experts have admitted that they could be wrong with this theory, especially since the discovery is so unique and they have nothing to compare it to. While signs of trepanation have been found in some 1,500 skulls dating back to the Neolithic period, this is a first for a medieval burial in Italy. It's doubtful that the hole in the woman's head resulted from violence, given its precision and placement. Signs of healing show that the procedure was performed at least a week before she died. Han urn burials. In 2016, archaeologists working in northern China's Hebei province found 113 ancient burial urns among the ruins of the ancient fortress city of Fujicheng. They date back to the country's period of the Warring States, which lasted from 475 to 221 BC. Each tomb consisted of 2 to 3 clay vessels with human remains inside. A small hole was drilled into each urn to let the deceased individual's soul come and go as they please. Interestingly, nearly all the burials contain the remains of children. Just 6 containers were filled with bones belonging to adults, all of whom are believed to be civilians rather than warriors. The discoveries at Fujicheng are surprising because experts previously thought that urn burials were only practiced on children rather than adults. Excavations are ongoing, and researchers hope that the findings will teach them more about the Western Han Dynasty's burial customs. They believe that there may even be more adult urn burials waiting to be found. A mass death. During a severe drought around 9 million years ago, dozens of giraffes, rhinos, horses, and saber-toothed cats went to watering holes in what is now Spain, desperately seeking relief from the deadly dryness and heat. Sadly, they perished from dehydration, starvation, and getting stuck in the mud. Rain soon returned to the region, burying the animals quickly and leaving their bodies undamaged by scavengers and the elements. Miners discovered one of the ancient bone-filled holes in 2007. Since then, archaeologists have identified 9 similar sites near modern-day Madrid. Researchers recently examined a collection of 9,000 bones found inside an ancient watering hole known as Batallones 10. They identified dozens of species, including at least 15 large mammals such as extinct mastodons, saber-toothed cats, badgers, rhinos, cattle, horses, and musk deer. The team also discovered a previously unknown extinct giraffe relative called Decennatherium rex. At roughly 9 feet tall and weighing around 2.2 tons, it looked more like a gigantic moose than a giraffe. Experts identified the site as a watering hole based on the presence of amphibians and tortoises. They found that the animals died throughout 3 distinct episodes of drought. During those times, wildlife flocked to the watering hole and refused to stray far from it. Consequently, the creatures ate all the vegetation. Unwilling to leave the dwindling watering hole in search of food, they began to suffer from starvation and dehydration. As the water supply shrank, animals ventured into the mud to drink, got stuck, and died. Each period of mass death lasted weeks or months, until rain came and buried the remains in sediment. Sadly, it appears as though more tragic discoveries are to come. Study leader David Martin Perea told Live Science that the next step is for the team to dig deeper and further examine the death that occurred at the site. Bizarre ancient burial. While working at the Ofuka-cho archaeological site in Osaka, Japan last year, archaeologists unearthed a series of strange circular holes filled with the remains of 1,500 people and animals. The bizarre burials, which contain pigs, horses, and at least 1 cat, date back to the mid to late 19th century, during Japan's Edo period. Officials discovered the graves near a busy train station during the early stages of construction on a new skyscraper. There aren't any valuable goods in the tombs, suggesting that the people who were buried there were commoners. Some of the remains show signs of disease, so it's also possible that the deceased perished during a 19th century epidemic that swept through the area. Archaeologists also uncovered coffins filled with several bodies each, which supports the theory that the burials contain victims of a deadly disease. City officials said that the graves likely belonged to young people and children who lived locally. At the time of their deaths, the area was a farming region. It was the first discovery of a historical burial site in Osaka, and researchers are continuing to study the findings in hopes of learning more about what killed the grave's occupants. Bog bodies. A bog in Denmark is creepy in its own right. Situated on the country's Jutland Peninsula, the sparse, flat, mossy environment is eerily still, containing just a tree here and there. The discovery of over 500 remarkably preserved Iron Age bodies and skeletons within this region makes it even spookier. Known as bog bodies, these human remains date back between 800 BC and 200 AD, and they are discovered fairly regularly. Many of them are found with their hair, skin, clothes, and even the food in their stomach intact, owing to the oxygen poor and highly acidic conditions of the layers of dead moss in their watery graves. One of the most famous bog bodies is the Tolland man, who had visible stubble on his face when he was discovered in 1950. Researchers have spent decades trying to learn about who the Bog people were and why they died. Some bodies bear signs of extreme violence, including cuts to the throat. It was also unusual for the people of the time to bury their dead instead of cremating them, suggesting that the individuals were sacrificed as criminals, slaves, or even just for being commoners, according to National Geographic. A 2014 study challenged this notion after determining that some of the Bog people showed signs of having traveled great distances and wore elaborate clothing from foreign lands, indicating that perhaps the opposite was true, that maybe they were sacrificed because they were highly regarded in their villages. There are no written records of Danish Iron Age people's religious beliefs, so it's possible that scientists will never know who the Bog people were or why they were killed. Many experts do agree, however, that the victims were likely selected because they were seen as unique among the population. Bog bodies have been found elsewhere in Northern Europe, including Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, and Ireland. AngloSaxon burials. Ancient Anglo-Saxons had a unique way of dealing with their dead. Burials involved inhumation, meaning that the corpse was buried directly in the ground without a coffin or other container of any kind. The reason for this? It took significantly less resources to simply place a body in the dirt and then cover it up than it did to burn it. You'd have to have fuel, and it couldn't be raining or damp. It was also a lot simpler than carving an entire tomb or creating a stone dolmen. The good thing about Anglo-Saxons burying their dead straight in the dirt is that thanks to the alkaline soil, their remains are often extremely well preserved even today. However, it also means there wasn't a lot of uniformity to the burials. Anglo-Saxons would either bury the dead in a shallow grave, as if it had been dug out by hand, or in a massive pit over 6 feet deep. Sometimes they would even place a bunch of people in the same pit if they died at the same time, as it seemed to be more convenient. For these people, burial was more about disposing of the body than preparing a journey to the afterlife. In some cases, the body of the deceased would be mutilated before it was buried, usually with the head cut off. Archaeologists have found plenty of ancient cemeteries filled with headless corpses. Though this was usually reserved for criminals or people who were hanged or executed, scientists aren't completely sure. In some instances, there have been graves found to contain several human heads, while others have been found with the heads placed at the feet of corpses. Why the Anglo-Saxons did this, however, remains a mystery. Secret Greek ritual. The Eleusinian Mysteries go all the way back to ancient Greece. It's arguably the most famous secret religious ritual in the world. The religious rites involved rituals that had to do with the earth goddess Demeter. Demeter's story is often told in Greek mythology. She went in search of her daughter Persephone after she was abducted by Hades and taken as his bride against Demeter's wishes. The basic gist of the story is that Demeter went to Eleusis for help in finding her daughter, later learning that she was deep in the underworld. Somehow, this simple aspect of the myth turned into one of the most enduring religious ceremonies in world history. The major ceremony was held in Athens. The first part of the Eleusinian Mysteries was a march that initiates took from Athens to Eleusis, which is indeed a real city. But the core of the ritual was performed inside the Hall of Initiation, and even after 2,000 years, we have no idea what it entailed. It was such a secretive ritual that nobody of the day wrote about it, and no records exist that historians know of. We know that something was chanted, a mystery was revealed, and some kind of act was performed. However, we don't know the details, and sadly, once Christianity took hold across Europe, the Eleusinian Mysteries were considered blasphemous and pagan, and so its practice was abolished. What's really amazing is that the ritual was performed for a longer span of time than Christianity has existed. What began as a popular myth turned into an annual ritual ceremony performed for thousands of years. Maya Life Force Ceremony. When archaeologists discovered an ancient arrowhead covered in human blood at a Mayan temple in Guatemala, they found evidence of an ancient ceremony going back at least 500 years. It was a type of bloodletting ceremony in which a person was drained of their blood, which the Maya thought of as the life force, in order to feed the gods. The temple in which this arrowhead was discovered is at the archaeological site of Sacpetin. During the ritual, a person was cut open with the obsidian arrowhead, and then their blood was allowed to spill out. Professor Prudence Rice from Southern Illinois University says bloodletting was a way to nourish the gods, and that by spilling human blood, the Maya believed the gods could absorb the human life force. This was different than a human sacrifice. In this case, it was just cutting. Nobody had to die. This ceremony was normally done when a person came of age or when a birth happened. It was to ensure that the newborn human, or the person who was turning into an adult, would be connected to the gods for the remainder of their life. It was almost like a joining ceremony, where the individual's life force was drunk by the gods, creating a lifelong bond. And, in case you were wondering, this ceremony was not forced. The person participating, even though they stabbed themselves in the tongue with an arrowhead, did survive. Cannabis Ceremonies. According to new research, ancient worshippers at a Judahite temple in what is today Israel practiced ceremonies in which they smoked cannabis. Proof of this was discovered at the ancient fortress in Tel Arad, identified by Israeli scientists. They performed a chemical analysis on residue found on altars from the Iron Age about 2,700 years ago. Both altars had traces of not only frankincense, but also cannabis. The frankincense was easy enough to explain. It came from the Boswellia sacra, a tree found in Oman, Somalia, and Yemen. The cannabis must have come from somewhere far away, suggesting the original Jewish people almost 3,000 years ago were importing huge amounts of marijuana from abroad. It was probably dried, what is referred to today as hashish. The hash would be burned on the altar, mixed with animal dung. As the smoke filled the temple during a ceremony, everybody in attendance would experience its psychoactive effects. The hash would slow down their brains, seep into all breathable air, and make the rituals seem extremely powerful. The Judahites were worshipping Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament or the Torah, roughly 300 years before Jesus is believed to have been born. These were probably quite similar to religious ceremonies that are still practiced today, except imagine a modern church getting filled with smoke. Definitely would make for a different religious experience. The Wolfmen warriors. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of sacrificed dogs from the Bronze Age, which they say is evidence of a bizarre ritual practiced by so-called wolfmen. Of course, I'm not talking about actual werewolves. This was a group of warriors known as wolfmen. One of the reasons was because of their bizarre initiation ceremonies. When a teenage boy grew up and became a warrior, part of the initiation ceremony was to eat dogs and wolves. They did this about 3,900 years ago in what is today southwestern Russia. The whole point behind the ritual was that the boy would symbolically become a wolf by consuming the flesh of a canine. This is according to both David Anthony and Dorcas Brown, professionals from Hardwick College in New York. They even say that there are written records of this type of ceremony as far back as 2,000 years ago, connecting the existence of the wolf warriors to ancient myths of canines, warfare, and death. The wolfmen warriors took their obsession with these animals to crazy heights. They always wore the skins of dogs and wolves, they took on names that had dog or wolf in them, and they ate them as part of their ceremonies. These were the very image of warriors from the Bronze Age as we think of them today. Dancing with the dead. In Madagascar, there is an ancient ritual that continues to exist even to this very day. In the local Madagascar language, it's called Famadihana. In English, it translates roughly to the turning of the bones. The ritual ceremony involves living people digging up the corpses of their dead relatives, wrapping them in fresh bandages and cloth, and then dancing around with the re-wrapped remains before they put them back in their graves. To the outside world, most people just refer to it as dancing with the dead. According to scientists, this ritual has very real consequences in the modern age. Here's something you probably don't know. Madagascar is one of the only countries in the world that still suffers from outbreaks of the plague. Yes, the actual Black Plague. Each year, roughly 100 people die from the plague in Madagascar. Scientists say the spreading of the plague could have something to do with families dancing around with these corpses. If a person dies from the plague, then their body is dug up later, and when people are exposed to it, they can catch the disease too. And it happens very quickly. According to news sources, the first case of the plague in Madagascar back in 2017 was a man visiting the country. He developed malaria-like symptoms and died in just 4 days. Since then, the UN's office in Madagascar says at least 1,192 cases have been identified. How often do families actually dig up their loved ones? It's only between every 5 and 9 years. The tradition shows no signs of stopping, especially since it's been going on for centuries and is considered sacred. The whole reason behind it is to honor the ancestors and bring good fortune to those who take the time to dance with the dead. What do you think about people in Madagascar contracting the plague because of this ancient ceremony? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The Bushman Bull Dance. The Bushman people of southern Africa are the oldest inhabitants of the entire continent. These are tribal people who have been living in the Kalahari Desert for over 20,000 years. Their home includes huge patches of Angola, Botswana, Namibia, and of course South Africa. Genetic evidence has even suggested that these are the oldest human beings in the entire world. They were hunters and gatherers for a very long time, until modern society ruined their traditional ways of life. But in some parts of Africa, the Bushmen are still around, and one of their ceremonies still exists. It's called the bull dance. The ceremony is held when a girl hits puberty. The Bushmen take an eland, which is a kind of antelope, and make it into a broth. In the case of a puberty ritual for girls, she will be isolated inside a small hut during her menstruation. The women of the tribe will then perform the bull dance, imitating the mating behavior of the male elands. A man will play the role of the bull, dancing around with horns on his head. The whole purpose of the ritual is to keep the girl beautiful, to make sure she never goes hungry, and to keep her life peaceful. Kava Ceremonies. All across the South Pacific Islands, there is a long-held tradition of drinking kava from the kava root. Kava goes back hundreds and hundreds of years to days unknown, when the indigenous people of the South Pacific Islands began consuming the beverage ceremonially. It's drunk when a new village chief is installed, when an agreement is made between two communities, or even when welcoming a visitor. In Tonga, a Kava ceremony is conducted each time a new king is given his title. This is one of the only ancient ceremonies that might be considered primitive that the English royal family has participated in recently. In 2018, when Prince Charles was inaugurated as an honorary chief in Vanuatu, he had to take part in a Kava ceremony. So too did Prince Hare when he visited Fiji that same year. But just what is this old and mystical drink? Kava itself has been used by village healers as a natural remedy for just about everything. It's said to calm people, sedate them, take away stress, help get necessary sleep, and to heal a variety of symptoms. The truth is that kava comes from Piper methysticum, a plant only found in the Pacific Islands. It acts like alcohol when consumed, inducing a feeling of calmness and relaxation. It also works as a depressant drug, slowing down messages between the brain and the body, producing a sort of euphoria. Kava has made its way into some communities in America as well, with kava bars becoming an almost trendy new health craze. Have you ever tried the kava root? Let me know in the comments below. The Tarja People. The Tarja People have one of the most complicated funeral ceremonies in the world. These people live in South Sulawesi, Indonesia. It's a picturesque region covered in mountains and far away from what you might consider civilization. The Tarja people have been living here for centuries. Their lives revolve around death and life, the eternal cycle. For the Tarja, a funeral isn't a sad time, but a time to celebrate. First of all, funerals can be held years after a person has died because the celebration is so complicated that the family must save enough money to pay for the expenses. The body can't actually be buried until enough funds have been raised. A lot of people go into debt in modern times just to participate in a funeral ceremony. When the ceremony is finally held, the entire village gets involved and it goes on for weeks. The purpose behind the ceremony, which is kind of a big party, is to reinforce the bond between the living and the dead. Between their actual death and the end of the ceremony, they aren't even considered dead. They just refer to them as sick or asleep. And while awaiting the ceremony, the family is charged with taking care of their sick relative. This means that the dead body stays in the home and must be symbolically fed, must still participate in daily life, and they'll even tuck it in at night. At the end of the funeral, when all the partying, animal sacrificing, and feasting is done, the body is taken up to a cave in the cliffs. There it joins the thousands of other bodies and moves on to the afterlife. Number 1. Celtic Fire Festival. There are 8 sacred days in Irish mythology. The one I'm going to tell you about is the fire festival called Beltane. Before I get into the actual ceremony, it's important to understand that in Celtic tradition, a year is divided into 2 different parts. There is the darkness called Samhain, and then there is the light called Beltane. The 2 parts are divided a second time to create the 4 seasons. Each time the season changes, there is a fire festival to mark the occasion. Beltane was the celebration of the end of the dark half of the year and the coming of light, as well as the beginning of the harvest season. It was the most important out of all the Celtic festivals in Ireland. It wasn't only celebrated by the Irish either, but also by the Scottish and those living on the Isle of Man. On the night of the ceremony, the festival included lighting bonfires, avoiding supernatural spirits like fairies that were particularly active, and performing rituals to keep said supernatural spirits at bay. But in real Irish tradition, It was basically a giant party, with people leaping over bonfires to gain protection and to have a better chance of getting wealthier in the year to come. And of course, lots of animals were sacrificed to appease the ancient Celtic gods.
Monster gorilla. At the Madrid Zoo in Spain, one of the zookeepers got a little bit more than they bargained for when they had an unexpected and ugly encounter with a monstrous gorilla. The 46-year-old zookeeper was left absolutely beaten, with a pair of broken arms, a serious head injury, chest trauma, and multiple fractures. The zookeeper had been performing her daily tasks at around 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning near the gorilla enclosure. Now, keep in mind that the gorilla enclosure is protected using a special 3-door system. This system is designed so that the zookeepers doing maintenance and feeding don't ever end up face-to-face with the animals. But in this case, the system didn't work, though how or why is still under investigation. As a result, the unfortunate zookeeper found herself staring into the eyes of the zoo's 29-year-old male gorilla Malabo. The 440-pound gorilla was just as shocked as the zookeeper, and as a result, he lashed out. Malabo picked up the woman and shook her with his enormous strength, though keepers say it was not the full amount of strength he is capable of, which is extremely lucky for the zookeeper. It took a while for the zookeepers to get a tranquilizer dart into the gorilla, and in that time he managed to cause some pretty significant harm. Her injuries resulted in her needing intubation, and she was hospitalized in grave condition. She had been working at the zoo for 19 years and had never experienced anything like this. Staff at the zoo were surprised by this turn of events. No one understood how the security system failed. Malabo has spent his whole life in captivity and had always been okay with the zookeepers, so his lashing out was definitely out of character. But hey, maybe he was just having a bad day. The Scavenging Bear. In the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee, a couple of hikers stumbled upon the body of a dead person near the Hazel Creek Trail. The remains of the man had clearly been there for a while and were badly decomposed. The hikers contacted the park's rangers, who went out to take care of the situation. When the rangers found the body, it was no longer alone. There was a bear feasting on the remains of the unfortunate man. When the rangers arrived and found the bear scavenging the body, they had to immediately euthanize it. The situation, while horrifying, is thankfully pretty uncommon. The identity of the person was not revealed in the reports. The incident remained under investigation as to how he died. Conservation gone wrong. When dealing with wild animals, sometimes even the best intentions prove fatal. When an anti-poaching team in South Africa went into the wilderness to respond to reports of poaching, one of their team members was attacked and killed by a charging elephant. According to what the Victoria Falls Anti-Poaching Unit said on their Facebook page, the victim, Clever Kapandura, had been with the conservation organization since 1999. He was experienced, committed, and was killed by the very animal he was trying to protect. When the team arrived on the scene, they were hoping to bust some poachers in the act and remove them from the wildlife area. But what they found instead was an angry bull elephant observing them from some distance away, which is never a good thing. The bull charged the group, who split up in an attempt to avoid the attack, but Clever wasn't fast enough. The team members managed to then scare the animal away, but it was too late for their teammate, who died from his injuries before medical assistance arrived. The elephant rammed into Mr. Kapandura, crushing him to death. Snakes under the floor. In Northern California, a woman phoned her local snake removal company after she saw a few rattlesnakes scurrying underneath her home. Al Wolf, the professional that responded to her call, has been removing snakes for years. After all, this is a pretty big problem in the state. What Al found, however, when he arrived at the woman's mountainside home in Santa Rosa was significantly more intense than any other house call he'd taken before. Al is the director of Sonoma County Reptile Rescue. When he showed up to take care of the few rattlesnakes, he didn't even have enough equipment for what he was about to find. The den the snakes set up under the woman's home was absolutely massive. He was there for about 4 hours collecting rattlesnake after rattlesnake. In the end, he discovered over 90 of the serpents living underneath this woman's house, preparing to hibernate for the winter. 22 adult snakes and 59 babies. Can you imagine? He had to return 2 more times to continue collecting the rattlesnakes, and he even found a dead cat and a dead possum. He did manage to take out all the snakes and relocate them, but it was quite an ordeal. This is especially true for the homeowner, who had no idea she had a rather large mass of extremely venomous snakes living right under her nose. If this were your house, do you think you'd be comfortable enough to return, or would you just burn the whole thing down? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We have lots more videos coming up. Savage strays. In Parker County, Texas, a stray cat went on a wild and rabid rampage. The sheriff's office had to issue a public statement after the feral cat attacks, telling citizens that if they see a stray cat, absolutely do not, under any circumstances, try to feed it. The first attack occurred on December 24, 2020, when a young woman in her 20s stopped to try and pet an adult feral cat that she found on the street. When she bent over to say hello, the cat lashed out and scratched her. Merry Christmas. Just 2 days later, a 74-year-old man was attacked in his front yard by the exact same cat. In this instance, he was bitten several times and sent to the hospital. He hadn't even been trying to interact with the cat. It simply ambushed him in his own yard. The third and final attack happened to the animal control officer who was trying to get a hold of the crazy feline, though the officer wasn't injured that badly. The officer did manage to capture the cat despite it being so aggressive. After being captured, the cat tested positive for rabies. It was about as feral as it gets, literally prowling around the neighborhood, attacking people at random. Rabid animals are scary at any time, but especially when they're in the form of an unassuming street cat. The sheriff's office warned locals to steer clear of the feral cat population and to give any other wild animals their space in case of further rabies infections. Wild lions. Near a wildlife reserve in Tanzania, a trio of young children were mauled to death by wild lions. These are some wild cats that you really do need to be afraid of. The attack took place in August of 2021, when local children ages 9 to 11 went into the nearby forest to look for a couple of lost cattle they thought wandered in there. Unfortunately for the young ones, the missing cattle had actually been stolen by the lions. When the lions saw the kids, they immediately attacked. The young ones literally had no chance against the apex predators. All but one of the children were killed, but the one that did escape is likely traumatized for life. The three that lost their lives were all members of the same family. You can only imagine how devastating the news was for their loved ones. According to wildlife professionals, these types of attacks are not uncommon in Tanzania. Last year alone, at least 36 lions had to be relocated after a string of attacks on the surrounding communities. The issue results from the natural interactions between the Maasai people, who have been allowed to live within the borders of the national park so that they can feed their cattle, and the wildlife that are protected in the preserve. Having livestock in a lion park obviously has its drawbacks. Sometimes the lions will steal the livestock and attack the people as well. Swimming with gators. It was a perfectly ordinary day in Martin County, Florida for an unidentified man riding his bicycle through Halba-Tioki Regional Park. Unfortunately for the cyclist, his ordinary bike ride ended in a very Floridian way, with an alligator attack. According to the local papers, the cyclist lost control of his bike sometime around 11 in the morning while riding over a small wooden bridge. When he lost his balance, the cyclist rode off the edge of the bridge and fell into a small body of water about 6 feet down. Unfortunately for him, there was a hungry alligator lurking nearby. He was instantly attacked by a huge female gator trying to gobble him up for breakfast. When trapper John Davidson showed up to the scene later to take care of the bloodthirsty animal, he discovered the alligator to be over 8 feet long. The authorities didn't disclose the attack victim's name, likely for privacy reasons, but the fire rescue workers did say that he had to be airlifted to the nearest major hospital because he was suffering from traumatic injuries. We can safely assume that that's normal after an unexpected tangle with an alligator. He is expected to make a full recovery, and the alligator has since been relocated. But let this just be a reminder that in Florida, even just going for a bike ride near water can have deadly consequences. Shark versus surfer. Eric Steinley was surfing just 150 feet away from shore at Salmon Creek Beach in Sonoma County, California, when a great white shark came out of nowhere and tried to bite his leg off. The 38-year-old surfer obviously panicked when he was dragged underwater and realized the shark had rows of teeth sunk deep into his right leg. Instinctively, he put his left hand against the shark's face and then threw a punch in desperation. The underwater punch did the trick, startling the shark enough for it to open its jaws and release the human. Luckily, there were other surfers in the area who saw the attack happening and helped Eric get to shore before the shark could recover and finish what it started. They used a strap from Eric's surfboard to quickly tie a tourniquet around his bleeding leg. then used his board as a stretcher to carry him to the pickup point on the beach, where he could be taken by helicopter to the nearest hospital. In order to save his leg, doctors had to perform 2 surgeries, but he was ultimately relieved to have survived the ordeal. Jaguar Madness. Not everybody who goes to the zoo understands the rules. For example, a woman who was attacked by a jaguar in 2019 while visiting Wildlife World Zoo in Litchfield Park, Arizona. Unlike the rest of the park visitors who simply stay behind the barricades and take photos with their phones, this woman decided that she would crawl over the barrier to get a better look. She wanted the perfect picture for her Instagram. Apparently, the jaguar isn't really a fan of social media though, and the cat attacked her. According to a statement given by the zoo, the woman sustained injuries to her arm when the female jaguar tried to rip it off. She had to be taken to the hospital, though she did make a full recovery. According to the fire department who responded to the scene, the woman was trying to take a selfie with the jaguar. While she didn't actually get inside its cage, she got close enough to the fence that the jaguar was able to grab a hold of her arm with its claws, causing some pretty serious damage. The woman was saved by witnesses at the zoo who distracted the jaguar long enough for it to let go of the foolish woman. If it hadn't been for the quick-thinking Good Samaritans, she may have been hurt worse than she was. Since this attack, the woman has returned to the zoo and made a public apology for her poor behavior. The biggest snake. According to reports, deep in the darkness of the Amazon jungle, there was a terrifying monster that went on a killing rampage. The anaconda, the largest of all snake species currently in existence, averages about 29 feet in length and weighs around 550 pounds. But bizarre reports circulating online made claims of an even bigger anaconda that had been tracked down by wildlife specialists. There are stories that state it took nearly 40 days to hunt down and kill the snake, after it reportedly ate 257 people. It was allegedly 134 feet in length. It had been terrorizing the jungle inhabitants and feasting on just about every person it came across. But this must be a creature from legend because there is no way an anaconda can measure over 100 feet long. Even the prehistoric titanoboa was around 50 feet long. All the reports you've been hearing of a snake over 100 feet long are incorrect. According to Snopes, most of the photographs associated with the giant snake actually come from around 2010, when they first started appearing on the internet. The images are actually of a completely normal-sized snake strategically placed on a children's toy model truck. Whoever took the picture really got an unbelievable angle. Truthfully, anacondas aren't really that dangerous to people. The biggest ones can in theory eat an entire person without an issue, but cases of this happening are extremely rare. They definitely don't go on killing sprees and murder hundreds of people. Plus, no snake that has ever existed in the history of the Earth has been as large as the one described in the fictional reports. Perhaps it was the mythological Yaku Mama that has come to life.
Sue the T-Rex. Sue the T-Rex just might be one of the most famous dinosaurs ever. In 1990, paleontologist Peter Larson unearthed an almost complete skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus rex in South Dakota. It was the most intact T-Rex skeleton ever found, but this discovery is one of major greed and controversy. Larson and his team paid a local rancher $5,000 to dig on his enormous ranch. They were driving around when the SUV broke down. One of the team members, Sue Hendrickson, decided to venture out on her own on the ranch where they'd spent weeks searching for fossils while they waited for the vehicle to get fixed. Amazingly, Sue discovered a lot of broken bones up the side of a cliff, as well as 3 articulated vertebrae. After showing one of the vertebrae to her colleagues, Sue, Peter, and the rest of the team ran back to the site. It was a complete T-Rex. They spent the next few weeks carefully unearthing the skeleton, now nicknamed Sue after Sue Hendrickson. They encased the bones in plaster and then transferred them to the Black Hills Institute, which was owned by Peter Larson, where they prepared them for display. More than 80% of the skeleton was recovered, making it the most complete and largest T-Rex ever found. Injuries found on some of the bones indicated that the T-Rex had been attacked. The whole team was working on preparing the skeleton to learn more about it, but were interrupted by federal agents who ordered them to stop all work immediately. The Black Hills Institute was in trouble. They seized through the T-Rex and all the records related to the dinosaur and the Institute. The FBI had suspicions that the team had stolen the T-Rex from federal land. The original owner denied that they had paid him. Then he said that the dinosaur was his.
But to make it more confusing, his ranch was part of Indian trust land, which only made things more complicated. So who stole from whom? And what about Sue? For 18 months, Sue remained locked up as the federal government gathered evidence against Larson and his team members, accusing them of stealing. Turns out the institute had been under investigation for years for illegally taking fossils off public lands and selling them internationally to make a fortune. In the end, 153 charges were laid against Peter Larson and 5 others on his team. Fossil theft, money laundering, and false statements to government agencies were just some of the charges. In the end, the actual owner of the ranch was declared the legal owner of Sue the T-Rex, and he made $7.6 million from the auction. Sue is now on display in Chicago's Field Museum. Peter Larson later served 18 months in federal prison for customs violations unrelated to the T-Rex. Larson still runs the Black Hills Institute of Geological Research in South Dakota, and they didn't let this snafu stop them. They have already found 10 other partial Tyrannosaurus rex skeletons. The story of smuggling fossils for millions and then getting investigated by the FBI and all of the drama in between just makes the discovery of Sue the T-Rex that much more intriguing. Stolen fossils. In Colorado, a trailer filled with over a dozen fossils, boasting a combined value of roughly $100,000, was stolen over the weekend from in front of a Denver hotel. The 20-foot trailer had a particularly rare specimen that will be sorely missed. This was a fossil of a shark 92 million years old, valued at least $50,000. This is according to the owner of the trailer, Geodecor Inc. Other stolen fossils included a skull belonging to a predatory fish from the Cretaceous period, valued at $20,000. And finally, a stingray fossil was valued at just over $10,000. The president of Geodecor was in town for the Colorado Mineral and Fossil Spring Show when the trailer was stolen. The Aurora Police Department was quick to investigate the incident. Geodecor offered a $1,000 reward to anyone with information as to the whereabouts of the fossils. The company also said that no questions would be asked and absolutely no charges would be filed if the trailer was returned. But of course, nobody steals $100,000 in precious fossils and then brings them back. Plus, they were probably worth even more than that. Even if the thieves couldn't sell the fossils on the black market, at least they'd have over a dozen awesome relics to use as decorations in their house. So far, there has been no word on whether the fossils were ever returned or what exactly the thieves plan to do with them. The Sleeping Dragon. In 2011, miners working in Alberta, Canada, discovered something truly amazing, and as is usually the case, it was completely by accident. An excavator hit something much harder than the surrounding rock, and strangely colored lumps were coming out of the machine. The crumbled remains would come to be the most pristine and well-preserved dinosaur fossils anywhere on Earth. To make things even more exciting, the fossil was found to be a new type of armored beast. It was a petrified nodosaur that stretched 18 feet long, weighing nearly 3,000 pounds. This lumbering land animal somehow died and ended up in a river that then washed into the sea where it sunk to the ocean floor and into mud that kept it preserved. When it was found, nothing went very smoothly. Researchers think it was fossilized whole, but after the trauma from the mining machine, only the front half of it could be recovered. When researchers tried to lift it from its resting place, where it had remained the last 100 million years, the nodosaur broke apart. After hours and hours of excavations in 12-hour shifts, the dino and the surrounding rock weighed 15,000 pounds. Then, when cameras were recording, the rock shattered. The challenge now was trying to figure out how to save it. Using plaster casts, they were able to transport it 420 miles. Good thing is that in the end, everything worked out. It was a close call, but the technicians managed to piece the dinosaur Humpty Dumpty back together again. Now you can see the bony mosaic of body armor on the neck and back of the nodosaur, and gray circles that outline the individual scales. Caleb Brown, a postdoctoral researcher at the museum, says, "We don't just have a skeleton, we have a dinosaur as it would have been." While this might have been the story of the well-preserved dinosaur that never was, miraculously it is safe and put back together. The dinosaur was ultimately put on display at the Royal Tyrrell Museum in 2017, with some witnesses claiming it was like looking at a real sleeping dragon that could awake at any moment. Fossils destroyed. Philip Bell, a graduate student from the University of Alberta, was almost brought to tears after the irreplaceable fossil of a duck-billed hadrosaur was destroyed. Philip and his team from the university discovered the fossil near Grande Prairie in northern Canada. The team was planning to move the fossil sometime in July. They covered it up using all the appropriate methods and went back for it later. But when they found it again, it was smashed to pieces. Someone, likely with malicious intent, discovered the location of the fossil and purposely destroyed every trace of it. There is absolutely no way to reconstruct what Philip and his team had found, and the chances of finding another one in the same condition are not great. Bones from the very rare hadrosaur were found scattered throughout the site or altogether missing. And to make matters worse, the paleontologists found bottles of alcohol and other leftovers all around the site, suggesting a group of hooligans had gotten liquored and thought it would be funny to smash apart a piece of history that had been sitting perfectly fine in the ground for millions of years. After the incident, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and officials with both the University of Alberta and the Royal Tyrrell Museum investigated the destruction, but so far nobody has been brought to justice for the crime. So I want to give a big shout out to Israel Guerra and Serena Kaineth Barondo. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and supporting this channel. If you are new here and you like to hear about new and shocking discoveries, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. A Jurassic Ransacking. The Isle of Skye in Scotland is one of the quietest and most peaceful places in the world, with virtually no crime. And yet the Isle of Skye was the recent location of a heist. It wasn't a very lucrative one, but it was still a brazen daylight robbery. Fossils dating back to the mid-Jurassic period were stolen from the face of a cliff by thieves using crowbars. This illegal removal of fossils and the ransacking of the prehistoric site has been labeled a wanton act of vandalism and one of the worst ever recorded at any site of special scientific interest, as these types of places are called. A spokesperson for the Scottish Natural Heritage claimed the incident was organized, and the thieves had searched specifically for valuable vertebrates. But what makes this incident so horrific is that the specimens ended up on eBay. Someone actually stole fossils from a protected area and then put them on eBay. Experts say the thieves were probably hunting for rare fossilized bones of marine reptiles like plesiosaurs. Cracked and broken fossils of ammonites, which obviously the thieves viewed as worthless, were found scattered throughout the scene. Unfortunately, we don't actually know how much the fossils ended up selling for in the end, or if these guys were ever busted. The truth is that stolen fossils don't really get as much attention as stolen jewels or other crimes. But if you are a fossil collector, try to find out where the fossils are coming from. Stan the TRex. So remember Peter Larson and the FBI and Sue? Well, here we go again. Almost 30 years ago, a legendary pair of paleontologist brothers named Peter and Neil Larson uncovered a fossil of an enormous Tyrannosaurus rex that was 40 feet long in South Dakota. It became one of the biggest scandals in paleontology history. Just recently, the fossil, which has since been dubbed Stan the T-Rex, sold for $32 million. It sold for 4 times the original estimate. But the sale came after a very long legal battle between the brothers. In fact, all the money from the sale went to Neil Larson. His brother Peter didn't get anything. The chair of paleontology at the American Museum of Natural History, Mark Norrell, told news sources that the brothers will never get over their feud, especially now that the fossil sold for so much money. It all started with some legal troubles. The fossil was owned by the Black Hills Institute. They lent out the fossil and sold resin casts to museums. In 2015, Neil Larson, who owned 35% of the shares of the Black Hills Institute, sued the company. This is after they removed him from the board of directors because of a dispute involving shady business dealings and some alleged sexual misconduct. The Black Hills Institute was forced to sell Stan the T-Rex to pay off Neil Larson. His brother Peter was not too happy about it. The dynamic duo of fossil hunters is probably never getting back together after this whole debacle, going to show that the world of dinosaur bones can be just as dramatic as anything else. Nicolas Cage and the dinosaur skull. Nicolas Cage has actually agreed to return the stolen dinosaur skull that he bought for $250,000 to the Mongolian government. You can't really ask for a better headline than that. According to the official records, the Tyrannosaurus Batar skull was purchased by Cage at a Beverly Hills gallery in 2007. Nobody has ever accused Nicolas Cage of wrongdoing, Though we all know that this guy is maybe a little bit crazy, least of all for purchasing a stolen dinosaur skull. He got it from a gallery. They are the ones in trouble. But he voluntarily agreed to return the skull after being filled in on the circumstances surrounding its journey to America. Even though Nicolas Cage was given a certificate of authenticity from the gallery after purchasing the skull, it turned out that the I Am Chait Gallery had been involved in purchasing and selling dinosaur skeletons illegally smuggled from other parts of the world. The mastermind behind the whole thing finally pled guilty to taking the Tyrannosaurus skeleton out of the Gobi Desert in Mongolia for the purpose of selling. The guy was later sentenced to spend 3 months in prison, and as part of his guilty plea, the black market dino dealer agreed to help prosecutors find at least 17 other stolen fossils. And if you're wondering just what exactly the Tyrannosaurus bataar is, think of a smaller and less popular T-Rex that lived 70 million years ago and what is today the desert of Mongolia. The Bone Wars. The biggest rivalry in the history of paleontology began with Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope. These two fellows started out as friends after the political turmoil of the Civil War, but after they began hunting dinosaur fossils, a feud between them would spark what is known today as the Bone Wars. The men stopped being friends after Marsh pointed out a mistake that Cope had made when assembling the reconstruction of a plesiosaur from Kansas. Cope had placed the vertebrae in the wrong place. Marsh pointed this out at the Academy of Natural Sciences. Cope was humiliated, and from then on they were rivals. Each man wanted to find and describe as many new species of dinosaur as humanly possible. Marsh even hired spies to track his nemesis' progress, while Cope rushed his findings into academic journals, often missing information or straight up lying. It got very dramatic and very public. Marsh and the U.S. Geological Survey came under fire for corruption and incompetence. Marsh tried to destroy Cope and steal his fossil collection. In the end, both men were kicked out of the scientific community. Edward Cope died sick at the age of 56, and Marsh died 2 years later with less than $200 in his bank account. Still, the Bone Wars produced a huge amount of information and set the stage for the future of paleontology. The Fossil Heist. Yet another fossil heist has gone down in Canada. This time, a fossil worth $50,000 was stolen in the middle of the afternoon from an ammonite mine near the city of Lethbridge. The mining company is currently offering a reward for the fossil, but good luck getting it back. The heist took place almost immediately after miners recovered one of the rarest pieces of ammonite in the history of their operation. Miners took a short lunch break after pulling the ammonite fossil out of the ground. During their lunch break, 2 strange men appeared at the top of the open pit mine. One of the individuals came running down the side of the bank. He grabbed the fossil, stuffed it into his backpack, and then ran back up the bank and vanished. The miners did their best to chase the man down, but found themselves being threatened by another man with a pickaxe. Unfortunately, the men were forced to give up the chase. The miners identified the vehicle used in the getaway, a 1988 Chevy Longbox, and they even saw the guy's face. Still, the police have turned up nothing. The owner of the stolen fossil said the thieves had probably been extremely desperate to take such a risk in broad daylight. If you ask me, it sounds like an inside job. Buying a dinosaur. Fossil excavations can go wrong in any number of ways. Fossils get broken or thieves steal precious artifacts. But one of the biggest threats for fossil excavations is private buyers and online auctions. According to the BBC, the rising trend of selling fossils online is a huge concern for the scientific community. Bidders are basically fighting each other to purchase Triceratops horns, teeth from T-Rex, and even tails from duck-billed dinos. The huge demand in fossils has created a breed of prehistoric poachers who are frantically digging ancient skeletons out of the ground to make a quick buck. There are some pretty obvious reasons why this is not great. First of all, these prehistoric poachers don't have the necessary skills for properly extracting dinosaur bones. Sometimes they destroy entire skeletons just to get at the teeth. They are basically doing what African animal hunters have done for years, killing the elephants to get at the tusks. But in this case, the whole skeleton would probably be much more valuable than just a tooth. Experts say the damage done by the global fossil trade is going to get worse, placing roadblocks in front of scientific advancement and fueling a criminal underworld dedicated to acquiring fossils by any means necessary, including daylight robberies. Thanks for watching! If you could, would you buy a dinosaur fossil to put on display? Let me know in the comments, and let me know if you'd like to learn more about prehistoric creatures. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye!